There are lots of technical definitions for rural schools, and those definitions are useful, but they don't really capture the essence of what it means to be a rural community. I would define a rural school using something that you can't really measure. The two essential elements of a rural school are, one, an attachment to place. The school's identity and its purpose are attached and informed by the physical location where it is. The second defining characteristic of a rural school for me is the synergistic relationship between the school and the community. One of the things that we know from research on rural schools is that it's very difficult to improve a rural school without engaging the community in that effort, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to sustain and revitalize a rural community without strengthening the schools and having them as part of that process.
Collaboration in education, if you think about teaching, education, it's a team sport. It's not an individual exercise. So I think that particularly for rural leaders, rural schools, rural communities, it's really important to collaborate. And I think the stories that are in this project demonstrate how important it is to collaborate when you're working in a rural community.
The collaboration effort of this project began with going to Queensland, Australia, and presenting at their National Rural Ed Convention. And then I was fortunate that the president of SPIRA took me on a week tour of rural schools. That's the beginning of what we now know as this collaborative leadership project.
Rural schools in different geographic locations sometimes have more in common with each other than they do with non-rural schools in their own geographic locations. And so we saw an opportunity this past summer to bring together rural school leaders from 3 different contexts, from Kansas and Pennsylvania in the US and from Queensland in Australia, so that they could share with each other their successes and their challenges and the innovative approaches that they took to meeting the needs of their students and their families and their communities.
So Kuranda is a small town by comparison. It's only got 3,000 people in it. It sits atop the Kuranda Range in the rainforest, about 30 kilometres west of Cairns. It's been home for 10,000 years for the local indigenous Jabbergai people who still live here, and was also settled by Europeans that came in the 1800s and opened the area up to farming. Our students are made up of the local Jabbergai people, farming families, and families that came in the alternative lifestyle wave in the 60s and 70s, and then people that are involved in the tourism industry. So our little school is a prep to grade 12 school. It became a college about 12 years ago, and as a result of that, we currently have 370 students from 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds. 47% of our students are Indigenous, and we have 2 Indigenous communities, those of Mantaka and Korowa, that our school services.
We have from prep to year 12. I have 105 students in the school, so we're fairly small. It's basically 50-50 in the primary school as in the high school, but a lot of challenges at the school because I'm the 8th principal in 2 years. Seeing lots of changes, but it is an awesome little place, and the kids are just, good country kids that like to have lots of fun and learn along the way.
Mornington Island is a small island in the Gulf of Carpentaria. It's got a population of about 1,200. The only way to get to the island is by flight. There's a barge that comes once a week that brings our supplies that go to the local store. The school has 270 students from kindy to year 10.
I'm in a P10 school, about 170 students, in a town of about less than 1,000 people.
A little bit about Wamega. We serve primarily a white population in this community. We do have a growing number of Hispanic families, and we do have other races represented, but not a large population of minority students. We do have many professional parents who work both within our community as well as neighboring communities, as we do lie between our state's capital of Topeka and Manhattan, Kansas, home of Kansas State University.
Chapman High School. It's considered a 4A school, and we have kind of a unique variety of students that are from the farm and that are from the rural area and come from raising cattle, raising pigs and crops. And then we have those who come from the military who have just been all over the world.
Turkeyville Valley is a very small school. We actually have one campus. So our building actually houses our pre-kindergarten and then kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade.
We are the second smallest school in the state, so based on our student population. Somerset County, which we are in the southern part, is a very rural county in itself. We have very few businesses. We have mostly small businesses if we have them. Most people who live here work elsewhere. They don't have a lot of places in the community. I think the school would be either the business that employs the most. If it's not, it's a close second.
So when the coronavirus hit, it was a little surreal for us in outback Queensland, as there were no reported cases and the people were pretty much carrying about their daily lives as per usual.
We have had no cases of the virus in our area, but the impacts are still huge in terms of our school. One of the biggest things which is still affecting us is around student attendance and teachers. Because we're so isolated, it's really difficult for teachers in these situations because they're a long way from their families. Being able to get off the island and go back to the mainland and back to their communities was a big thing.
The closure of the tourism industry was massive for Cairns and Kuranda. Kuranda runs on tourism, and that had an immediate detrimental effect on our community. Obviously had significant health concerns for our Indigenous community. It became apparently very quickly that the Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory and far north Queensland would be highly susceptible if there was a COVID-19 outbreak.
When this all unraveled was around our spring break time. We were on spring break and the governor came out and said, we are closing Kansas school buildings. We're not quitting school, but we're going to change school as we know it.
And all of a sudden we had heard that our local college of K-State was going to go to online education. And we were just kind of in limbo of like, what's going to happen at this point? That led into a series of just the unknown.
With all the discussion of schools possibly being closed, discussions with the intermediate unit, we had actually asked our teachers 2 weeks prior to closing to start getting some materials ready just in case we closed.
On March 13th, when the school buildings were closed, we had a lot of families without internet, without the means to connect on, say, Google Classroom or whatever platform you might be using. So just to deliver instruction, being rural, I think that challenge hits you right away, is that you don't have everybody capable to get online or get on the internet and get the delivery of instruction.
And since there was no universal, this is what's going to happen, those decisions were left to 105 counties. Everyone had a different idea of that. So you're planning with different assumptions that continue to change even today, and then planning for an unknown. And that's almost an impossibility. And so within that environment, what we're seeing today, school people with trauma-like symptoms 30 days into it, where they can't sustain the model we're in. If that's in person makes sense for parents, but the educators are like, I can't do this because we're being quarantined every other day. I come to school, I don't know if I'm going to be teaching or not. And so this anxiety of how do you sustain that long in an environment that no one likes and everyone wants to go back to normal? And then how do you deal with the anxiety both on the parent side and the school side?
As we are getting ready to prepare for this next phase and going back to on-site learning, these people are coming back because they love children and they love what they do, but there's fear. I have students who suffer from anxiety and depression. I have staff members who deal with some of those, but now I'm seeing even staff or students that I never would have considered having those kinds of emotions or feelings, that's coming out.
The great thing about Kansas and what they did was they actually brought a task force together and made a continuous learning plan. They brought educators together, they brought teachers together, and really gave us a strong focus of where we needed to go. How much time did we need to be online with kids? And the governor stepped up and decided we were going to go online. And by doing that, it gave us a window there to be able to really make plans, step into what it was going to look like for us for the next 9 weeks.
Moving to virtual, we worked with families, creating a hotspot here on the campus so families could come. You know, technology and the devices, it's been a challenge.
We found out the school was closing on a Friday afternoon. So what we did was we utilized Summit Learning that our 5th through 10th grade students utilized. And then the other grade levels utilized Zoom as well as Google Classroom. Living rurally, we have some students who don't have internet. So we also offered paper pencil options as well for the students.
At school, our initial reaction to the prospect of school closing was to find out what access our students currently had to online learning. And so surveys were sent home to parents to gather data around what devices they had at home that students could work on. Teachers then decided that primarily our learning packs would be paper-based.
Communication was obviously key with both staff and with our community. We had to be very student and family focused in our responses. There were times when we would think, oh, we'll roll out a delivery of curriculum like this, or we'll put all of this particular stuff online, and then we realised that that wasn't necessarily going to work for some families, so we had to adapt on that.
One of the things we realised, of course, we had to move into an online environment of some shape or form. We don't have the same exact setup for every school. We don't have the same community support for every school. So what we had to do was look at an agile approach to allow schools to make local decisions that would support their community. What was really exciting was we looked at the high level of what would a school need and what would a community need moving into the space of delivering at-home learning for an unspecified period of time. So what we did was we have developed a rollout of 2-week units of work in the Australian curriculum. Next thing we did was we set up partnerships with various television stations. We had 3 partnerships we developed where we reached an agreement around a co-funding approach. We were able to get airtime for 2 hours a day for 3 days a week for the Australian curriculum delivery. We were able to actually create a television station that could be broadcast to every student in Queensland. We did all of that in 5 weeks.
The State Department of Education, so the Pennsylvania Department of Education, they devised a system where there are 29 intermediate units. So they are an intermediary between the State Department of Education here and the 500 school districts down here. Pennsylvania Department of Education funnels, if they need work done in the school districts, it goes through us. We create our own programs and services that are for the districts within our region that are assigned to us, as well as to school districts all over the state. I think the significant shift in our work happened when the schools closed. The Pennsylvania Department of Education became very reliant on us to get word out to the field on what is occurring and what's coming down the road as far as how do you teach online. Fortunately, we have a lot of experience in that because we have programs that are based for online learning. So we did a significant amount of webinars and official training for the school personnel, teachers, principals, and superintendents about how you teach online, how do you supervise teachers online, and how do you set up an effective online school. So just as an indication, there are about 5,000 teachers in our Intermediate Unit 8 region, and over the last 2 months, we have trained almost 900 teachers just on how to teach online.
The pandemic has impacted, I think, every single person right around the world in many different ways. For our schools in particular, it meant a very rapid response. It has been amazing throughout all of Australia, and also the stories I'm hearing from colleagues in the US. Rural communities, they've been very mindful about building relationships and maintaining relationships through a very stressful time.
What I rely on most is relationships and building trust in times of crisis, in times of critical incidents. It is so important that you have that currency to rely on. Just like a teacher, you can't teach anyone if you don't have a relationship with them.
There's a classic story of a little tiny school where there is no capability in that community for any online learning approach. The teachers recognised that the maths part was really causing grief for the parents. So the staff sat on one side of the school fence on a chair, and across the other side were the kids and the parents, and they did the maths lesson across the fence so that the kids and the parents were part of the learning journey. And funnily, that school has reported back to me that the relationship between the parents and the teachers has never been stronger.
One of the things that has always been critical to me and critical to help our staff understand is that relationships and building positive relationships with families has to come first, and with students. That relationship building that we work so hard on made a huge difference, I feel like, in the transition. It is so critical in my mind that the social and emotional health of our students and their families and our staff are always a priority.
When you're dealing with the pandemic or you're dealing with online, there becomes more of a gap between the socioeconomic levels with students. A lot of learning comes from interaction. Sometimes a teacher is the number one person that they can lean on, and that's not the case sometimes at their home life. They want to be at school.
What we work for is for kids. That is the absolute focus of people in education, especially those of us in leadership. Sometimes it can be a thankless job, but when you see that, a decision you made positively impacts a child, there's nothing more rewarding.
Teachers, by the nature of our profession, we thrive on regular interactions with the young people that we teach, and schools are really strange places when kids aren't there. And you've got to look after teachers when kids aren't there, because we thrive on that interaction of teaching young people. We had to use our wellbeing team and our head of Department of Student Services to focus on the wellbeing of our students and balance the well-being of students with obviously the need for the continuation of learning. We had to be responsive and adaptive and alter the method, the mode and the quantity of learning that we were rolling out, because we realized quite quickly we weren't experts in online learning. We got some good advice fairly early on, basically plan what you want to do, then chop it in half, because as teachers we tend to do a lot more in class face-to-face than you can do in the online realm.
We need to have our eyes on our kids, and we weren't having our eyes on our kids all the time. So we set up what we called a sunset mob, which we set up a fishing thing where the kids could come down in the evening. They could fish for a while and we could provide them some food to go home. So at least we could touch base with those kids that we weren't seeing, and that was something that the kids liked to do, so they would come down to the beach.
Taking care of kids when it comes to their basic needs. We were one of the very first schools in Kansas to provide food. Besides just the education, they come to our school to be able to get food. And when you're now at home and you have 3, 4, 5 kids at home, you have to feed them. And how are you going to even do anything without that? And so we really got a drive-through for parents to come in and would hand off to them meals. So on a Monday and Wednesday, we would hand them off 2 days of meals to be able to use. And not only could we hand off food, but if we needed to hand off something educationally to them, that was a way of also doing it through a drive-through. About 3 years ago, we decided to go one-to-one with Chromebooks. Thank goodness we did. I still remember a student that was using his phone to get on Zoom to be able to hear what was going on. And so now that they're home, the parent needed some help. And so they were farming and they were out on the tractor and you could just see it sitting there, but be able to actually see what was going on in that class and kind of participate and do a little bit of both at the same time. So life still does go on for our farming community.
A local telecommunications company immediately stepped in and said, we will provide free access to high-speed internet to every family that's without. And then we identified those families who were outside of our service area, and the district said, we will provide a hotspot so that you are able to connect.
The good news for the role of technology during the pandemic is where those schools were already positioned with laptops, internet access among the student body, they were able to advance quickly. The bad news is those places that did not have quality internet access, or students in circumstances where they didn't have the possibility of the online delivery opportunities, they were placed at a tremendous disadvantage.
We need to start thinking about how to best prepare future rural leaders. So I think this project will help us start to identify what are some of the particular skills and attributes that we need to foster and nourish to build into our pre-service teacher education programs.
Change is inevitable, and it's happening faster than we ever imagined it could happen. Our teacher and leader preparation programs have to change so that emerging educators have the knowledge, the skill sets, and the awareness to meet the future needs of their students. We must prepare educators different because reality is different and the future is ever changing. It is important to acknowledge the role of the school leader. One thing the pandemic has done has been to really force us to think outside the typical educational structure that we ourselves created. Often rural schools lead the way in being nimble and flexible. They've had to do this through necessity. Rural leaders are committed not only to their school community, but to the greater community in which they reside.
From my perspective, the growth of the leaders during the COVID experience has been directly tied to their ability to adapt to the challenges that COVID presented. In other words, they've become much more resilient, they've become much more engaging with families and with staff.
In leadership, what we do is look at this as an opportunity and decide what we're going to discard from the way we used to do things and what are we going to keep for the future of what we're doing now. And I thought that that probably encapsulates what I have seen in the takeaway from this COVID crisis.
One of the most important aspects of leadership, especially when you're thinking about rural schools, is the idea that leadership is not a job title. Leadership is an activity, and it's something that everyone within the organization can and should contribute to. One of the things that we learned from this experience is that people across these organizations, from teachers to principals to superintendents, stepped up and provided leadership to keep their schools going through this difficult time, to support their families and communities during this difficult time. And so one of the takeaways from this experience for someone who studies leadership is it really reinforces that importance of collaboration and of sharing leadership responsibility and involving people in providing the leadership that's needed.
Peter Kelly, he said the COVID-19 epitomises what school leaders do best. They get on with the job and they do what they do best, and that's leading their schools. COVID-19 has meant that those informed decisions have had to be made very quickly. Also, with our school leaders, they have discovered a lot about themselves, about their own skill set and how they can manage in an emergency situation. School leaders have grown enormously as a result of the pandemic.
The thing that stuck out the most for me was the importance of building capacity within your team. As a leader, my role is to delegate and to be an example, but at the same time though too, I need to make sure that those in my team have the ability to take care of tasks when I'm not there. To see the capacity that my staff had, from teachers to my principal, the ability of all of them to work together and step up, and the skills they had really instilled in me that importance of continuing to build that capacity, because it was so essential for us with the school closure.
It became evident pretty quickly that your staff have to have faith in the leadership team, that we know what we're doing. It wasn't always coming from the leadership team. We had to rely on the fact that some of our teachers were experts in these areas as well.
Leaders are one of the people, especially in schools, that are the loneliest job. I do believe that as a group of principals, we have a lot to give each other in supporting each other to make the right decisions and be better leaders. And whether it's in our own backyard or across the ocean, every leader has the ability to share something that someone else might be able to take away.
It's amazing how, whether you're in Kansas or Australia, that some of the challenges we were all sharing were very similar. That really generates you're hearing a good idea that, oh, this school did this, oh, that's a great idea, we could do something similar. So I think that sharing just is a spark.
I know for a fact that there are school leaders in one country who learned ideas from someone in another country that they've been able to apply in their own settings. And so that sharing of ideas just broadens the scope and scale in which the collaboration occurs.
A big takeaway for us was that real collaborative practice, particularly when we found ourselves planning for the shutdown of schools or the partial shutdown of schools, where teachers found themselves working together in teams to prepare for lessons of a very different type, where they had to actively make decisions around the curriculum that they were going to deliver and how they were going to deliver. The feedback that I got from principals, without fail, was that opportunity that week was some of the best professional collaboration they've ever had in their schools and school communities, because there was a shared moral purpose, we had a timeline, we all knew that there was something new to be done here.
At the end of the day, our parents have got to spend a whole lot more time with their kids that they would not have had, and the conversations and the relationships built around that, I think, are a positive impact as well.
We will be so much better as rural communities and rural schools by going through this and seeing our areas of need and being more focused in on how do we correct and fix them. We know where they were, we know we had issues, but even now we kind of see where the priorities need to be. It also means we really need to support our rural leaders because they're by themselves. What they overcame in the spring, what they're doing now, how they're doing whatever it takes to reach their rural students, to me, it's an amazing story. I hope coming out of this that the rest of our country in the urban, suburban areas realize, rural communities are vital to the success of our country, and we have to support them. If we can take away barriers like connectivity or other areas that cause inequities, think about how if we leveled that off, how much better things could be for our country and our regions that we grow up in and that we work in.
I think at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the reality that the team in state schooling solved every single problem that came our way. Collaboration across the divisions and across the branches of government and other agencies required really, really significant decisions to be made that required us to actually get on board and put skin in the game straight away, not hide behind a policy or a past procedure and say, oh, that's not possible, but instead say, let's put that aside, let's make something work.
I think even though COVID-19 has had such severe consequences for our countries, it's also brought to the forefront the possibility of such a professional learning community that we can do it online